Coralee Ditman is the person who did the recorded presentation. She's an environmental specialist here at the Washoe EPD, and she's not available today, so she pre-recorded hers. I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a background. This is a project that came out of the climate resilience, and there was a 2-year process that was BIA funded to do a vulnerability assessment and adaptation. And that led to the development of the Resilience Garden Toolkit. And that was looking into long-term climate change projections, an analysis of the area, the conditions, and everything that came through from climate modeling was looked at and was focusing on culturally significant plants. And the pine nuts are the sort of paramount culturally significant plant that was covered in this. And they brought in a renowned pine nut propagation specialist team who work for the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Center, and they're housed at the University of Nevada, Reno. And so they came and evaluated the tribal lands and spent a significant amount of time with the WEPD staff in the pine nuts to identify the best propagation locations. And they introduced the importance of the nurse plant, which is something that you will see brought up in this presentation that Coralee did here. And then lengthy meetings occurred with the BIA, the BLM, and the staff to get the planting island approach approved. And that idea is touched upon in this presentation, but it's the idea of finding the most ideal spots for the regrowth after fire. And then planting islands of plants there, and then eventually those will grow together as opposed to trying to reseed the whole area. So this is something that is covered in there. And this is considered an integrated, holistic, culturally appropriate, climate smart land management approach. And it is addressed in what is called the Climate Resilience Garden Toolkit. And so this brought about the approaches that are being used in this fire restoration. So I'm going to move forward to do Coralee's presentation. And Coralee was brought on to the Environmental Protection Department specifically because she has a history of terrestrial restoration. Does anyone have any questions before I play? All right, we're going to play it.
Hey, Emily, I don't think we can hear the volume from the presentation, no. Okay. I want to pause it and let's start over.
Well, with timing, it's less important than actually having a package. I built it.
Hang on. Can you hear it now, John?
No, still no sound. Try it again.
Okay. You hear it?
No, still nothing on our end. Hold on one moment. Let me go grab IT and maybe, I think you might have to release the screen share and start it over again. One moment though.
Okay, I can stop it and start it again.
Hey, Emily. Okay, so go ahead and stop screen sharing.
Okay, I did stop it and I just opened it up again and I was about to try it again.
So did it allow you to choose what screen you wanted to use?
Yes.
Okay, and then when you're on that page, there is a sound button on the bottom left half corner. And you're gonna wanna click that to enable, I think it says enable sound. So before you click the page you want, go to the bottom left-hand corner and there should be a button where you can click the sound.
All right, let's try it again.
Hi everyone, my name is Coralee Ditman and I'm an environmental specialist too for the Washoe Environmental Protection Department. And today I'm going to talk about post-fire restoration and cultural protection on Washoe land. A little bit about myself. I'm a graduate from University of Nevada, Reno. I studied forest management and ecology, and I also have a minor in rangeland. I've been doing restoration and rangeland for about 2.5 to 3 years now. and it's my passion, and working with the Washoe tribe of Nevada and California gives me the opportunity to apply my experiences on large scale projects. The Numbers Fire, size and destruction. So the Numbers Fire burned about 18,380 acres, including 5,833 acres of Washoe tribal allotment lands. This resulted in a loss of pinyon pine harvesting areas and the exposure of numerous sensitive cultural sites. The fire was caused by a faulty muffler on a semi-truck igniting gases along the highway. The fire began on Monday, July 6, 2020, and it didn't take till July 14th, 2020 to put the fire out. And thank you to all the firefighters that worked very hard. This was a very fast spreading, insane fire, and one of the largest to date for this year for Nevada. What the pine nut range means to the Washoe tribe. The pinyon juniper ecosystem have had subsistence, cultural, spiritual, economic, aesthetic, and medicinal values to the Washoe peoples for centuries. And single-leaf pinyon has provided food, fuel, medicine, and shelter to the Native Americans for thousands of years. Pinyon pines are extremely susceptible to fire. The Numbers Fire burned through important pine nut gathering areas for the Washoe tribe. Sagebrush and bitterbrush communities were also burned. These species are of cultural significance and are also used by animals such as mule deer, pronghorn antelope, upland game birds, and other sagebrush obligate species. And in these two pictures here, we have a traditional Washoe basket held by Clara Frank. And over in this photo, we have roasting of pine nuts. So historically, the pine nut range is very important to the Washoe people, and it is where most of the allotment lands are held. Tribal, state, and federal collaboration is key when working on such a large project. So the Washoe tribe is working closely with the Burn Area Emergency Response Team, also known as BEAR, which is made up of representatives from the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Bureau of Indian Affairs. And environmental scientists were with extensive experience in botany and post-fire revegetation was brought in as consultants. Based on the findings of the BEAR team, the BIA granted the Washoe tribe funding for the restoration project. In this map, you can see, hold on, let me kind of move this right there. You can see most of the recent fire history that has plagued the pine nut range south of Gardnerville. Since 2001, there have been fires. I believe there's been more than that. This is just what's been documented. And you can see in 2001, it was a pretty small fire. And throughout the years, the fires have grown significantly. If we look even at the 2017 Cutter fire, it's almost three times the size of the one that happened in 2001. And then this dark red outline is the Numbers Fire, and is by far the biggest fire that has devastated the pine nut range. So here we have the jurisdiction of what areas were burned in the pine nut range. In the light tan area, that's the Bureau of Indian Affairs administrated lands. And this is all the area that we will be restoring. The yellow area is your Bureau of Land Management lands. The lighter tan area, it's kind of hard to tell, but that's your Bureau of Reclamation. Green will be your Forest Service lands, which is down here, and then white is the private lands. I had the pleasure of working directly with the BEAR team and assisting with the creation of the BEAR report for the Numbers Fire. I was invited to ride along with the BEAR team's lead botanist, Michael Dolan, to assess burn severity. Burn severity, soil conditions, and assist in determining locations best suited for post-fire planting of culturally significant plants. The BEAR team was also very responsive to the tribe's concerns that the fire exposed culturally significant sites that would be attractive to looters and off-road vehicle riders. I will go over a little more about this later in the presentation. So in this map, we have our vegetation treatment areas. The Bear team worked with the tribe in determining the best restoration planting locations. These sites were first and most importantly chosen in regions that would be easy for future elders of the tribe to access and gather pine nuts. So they're pretty close to roads and easy access points. Then the planting areas are then focused on north-facing slopes to assure the planted seedlings would receive adequate amount of snow and moisture to grow. So with most of this area, these are our best planting areas. This is a pretty mountainous, rough terrain in some of the areas. So we had to find, you know, places that we can get in and plant efficiently. Restoration planting of pinyon pines. Germination of pinyon pines is epigeal, which means one or more seeds like to grow above ground or in very little amounts of soil. Although pinyon seedlings germinate in the open, few survive without some degree of protection from direct sunlight. Top growth during the seedling stage is extremely slow. The seedling height grows is usually less than 1 inch per year, and the diameter growth is usually less than 0.015 inches per year. Root growth, however, is quite rapid. They have a thick taproot. That's how they survive in the desert. They just throw that root straight down to get down to water. And that grows at a rate about approximately 6 inches and only 10 days after germination. Seedlings growing under low shrubs usually have a greater diameter growth and less height growth than usually those that grow under tree canopies. Seedlings have greater drought avoidance than shrub nurse plants. This pattern can further facilitate seedling survival and tree encroachment into adjacent shrub communities. Although complete crown closure is rare in most pinyon stands, the soils are usually completely occupied by tree roots where the stand is well developed, resulting in suppression of the understory vegetation. So just to go over, you know, germinated pinyon seeds, they need protection from sunlight, few survive, and they're slow growth. So our planting plan, the Washoe Environmental Protection Department will plant approximately 20,000 sagebrush and bitterbrush seedlings to act as a nurse plant to assist the pinyon pine seeds to germinate and grow. I know it's stated in my last slide that, you know, the best to grow under a tree or a mature shrub, but in a burn landscape, we don't have those options. So we will be planting seedlings with the seed to help the seed grow. And as stated, pinyon seedlings have been observed to have more success when they are growing under a nurse tree that is mature. These nurse trees provide shading and temperature modification, temperature modification, soils with lower bulk density, more nutrients, more organic matter and nitrogen, and higher filtration and water holding capacity. So for example, pinyon seeds are found under shrubs in mid-succession and under the tree crown in late succession, tend to have higher survival rates and grow better. Pinyon pines may also establish in the shade of large down logs. And so in this photo right over here, we have a shrub and we have a little pinyon pine. We have actually 2 pinyon pines growing right underneath. So continuing on restoration of planting pinyon pines, 2-person teams with small ladders can often be most effective when harvesting seeds. These are a couple of my co-workers out collecting pine nuts. So what you do is you take 2 ladders and you climb to the top of the tree and you collect the seeds and you drop them down and to the ground with some tarps. If the tree has a full crop, the picker should not pick all available seeds. And in interest of efficiency, low yield seed trees should be bypassed so you can save the seeds for future regeneration. And although these trees can be shaken mechanically, that is not how the Washoe tribe would like to collect, and that is not respectful to the trees. So in this map is the burn severity of the fire. We were lucky enough to have this really cool GIS specialist with the Bear team that put these together for us. As you can see, the unburned area is this dark green area. So some of like the really high mountaintops didn't get burned. Low to moderate is this light bluish area. So that was the majority of the fire. Moderate is yellow, and then red is high. So most of the fire was moderate due to it was a wind-driven fire, which made it fast-moving and not as devastating, but it did kill a majority of the trees. So the numbers fire burned to at a low to moderate burn severity, and the shrub component is not anticipated to return without assistance. Most of the sites visited had moderate to high vegetation mortality. Pinyon and juniper trees and sagebrush species were killed, and other shrub species were top killed. Even at low, moderate burn severity, sagebrush typically dies and only recolonizes naturally by seed. Sagebrush has a seed bank of 1 to 2 years when seeds occur under litter. At sites that experience moderate vegetation mortality, the perennial grass root crowns were intact, and they are expected to return in the absence of cheatgrass. So here we have the burn severity, vegetation, and mortality. Here we can see the low vegetation on this slide. So you can see there's actually still some trees alive, still some shrubs. This site will actually come back decently on its own. And then in the middle, we have the moderate vegetation mortality, which means most of a good amount of shrubs and grasses were burned, but the grasses weren't burned at high intensity, so their root systems are actually still intact and they will return on their own. And some shrubs with minor damage will survive. And then over here, we have the high vegetation mortality, where it's essentially going to become a moonscape. Nothing will survive, unfortunately. And these are, the areas we want to restore the most. And it's surprisingly, cheatgrass really loves these moonscapes. Their seeds blow right in here and they just take hold. So a little more about cheatgrass and fire. Cheatgrass is the biggest hurdle we face in rangeland restoration. Unfortunately, it's an invasive. It's taking over most of the Great Basin, and it's what is causing all these fires. So the Bear team's lead biologist, Michael Dolan, also took the time to teach me why and how cheatgrass takes over after fire events. So in this photo, what you actually are seeing is that cheatgrass will lay down, if you can see right here, and it will burn, but it lays down in the event of a fire and protects its seed. So what we did is we actually just took our boot and you just, scrape off that top burned area of the cheatgrass, and underneath is all of these like viable seeds ready to germinate, and they're unburned and perfectly fine. So that's really unfortunate, and there is action taken. We will be taking action to help prevent this. We're working with BLM to do aerial pre-emergent herbicide treatment this fall to help us prevent the cheatgrass of taking hold of these sites. So protecting cultural sites. Restoration lop and scatter treatment will be utilized to cover and conceal known cultural sites identified by the Washoe tribe. So what that means is we're going to take small branches, brush, and down burned trees, and we'll use these to conceal sites that have now been exposed due to surrounding foliage and cover burned away during the fire. And also there's more terrain now that's accessible due to suppression efforts, primarily like dozer and hardline. So now people are able to get to some areas that weren't easily accessed, but now there's some new roads, the firefighters had to create. And there's significant concern that these now exposed sites will be subject to looting, vandalism, and damage from off-road vehicles. This area is heavily used by motorcycles, UTVs, ATVs, and off-road trucks and Jeeps. So you can see in this photo that we have a house ring that is very clearly seeable now. And, you know, like I said, we're going to be taking these, you know, knocking down some of these trees and trying to make it look like a little more natural hidden area, so it's not as easy identifiable. Okay, so in this map, we have our debris flow hazard. We were lucky and also enough to work with the BEAR team, had a hydrologist working remotely that was providing us satellite imagery to show possible flood zones and areas of concern. The biggest concern with these debris flow hazard areas is the non-point solution into local watersheds, which is all shown on this map. So the low areas are in yellow, orange being moderate, and red high. And then they also show where these streams that they will be affected in the areas. So here's another the possibility of flash flood zones. While the BEAR team was here, we did have a couple thunderstorms, so we actually got to see firsthand how intense, you know, after fire flooding can happen. And these are a couple roads that lead into allotment lands that got flooded out and are almost basically impassable now, and also will need some restoration, you know, some backhoe work to help prevent, you know, more erosion on these roads. So hazardous waste and non-point source pollution, as stated before, yeah, I showed you all those, you know, areas that that, you know, could put sediment and stuff in the water. Well, also during the fire, some illegal dumping sites have been identified on allotment land, and unfortunately these hazardous sites are located right next to a perennial stream. So you can see some of these bins and, you know, old cars, and this, all these lines of willows, this is the stream right here. There's a car right there. And so what the BEAR team proposed to do in this event, that we're gonna get a, they're gonna help us they helped assist us in funding for a hazardous material site assessment of the unknown chemicals so we can properly dispose of them and clean up the area. But in the meantime, we are putting in willow wattles right along the creek bank to prevent any of these chemicals getting into our watershed. All right, looking into the future, as I stated in the beginning, the pine nuts have been plagued by fire for, you know, decades now, and it keeps getting worse. And, you know, we're going to lose one of the most culturally significant trees for the tribe, and it's important to protect these pinyon juniper woodlands. So, so what we're looking for is funding from the BIA includes treatment over a period of 2 to 3 years and period of 2 years and monitoring for 3 years. Washoe Environmental Protection Department, WEPD, will look into forest management funding to do thinning in pinyon juniper woodlands to help prevent fire from taking hold of these, you know, great forests. And WEPD is moving forward in establishing a program to grow native plants for future restoration. And then funding for climate change adaptation strategies to protect pinyon juniper woodlands would be great. All right, and that is the conclusion of my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Great. right, thank you. I think we're going to turn it over to Emily now, and we can open up for some questions if anyone has any on the chat box they'd like to present.
Yes, and we also have Susan Jamerson on the line, and we have Helen Fillmore on the line, and we have Rhiana Jones on the line. So we have a number of different staff members here from the department who may be able to answer any questions that I can't.
Okay, and if they want to go ahead and unmute themselves, go ahead and unmute yourself so we can get you all in there and we can start the roundtable for questions.
Yeah. Is there any questions at the moment?
I didn't see anything in the chat box, Emily, as I was monitoring it. There was one about GIS from Melissa that was kind of answered. I believe, they said to contact the BIA.
Yeah.
And I give them actually John Mosley's information from the BIA to contact. I know he did a lot of GIS with the BIA.
Okay, I see a couple of questions coming up now. So it says, how do we contact the Bayer team? Can you add that info into the chat box? And I would say that it depends on which area you're in, because the Bayer team's not going to be the same for every area, but the Bayer team that we worked with was through BIA.
So Emily, this is Susan. Each fire gets its own Bayer team, and this the main BIA person, his name was Leander Red. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. He's Crow, but he works at BIA Phoenix. Redbird. I'm sorry, Leander Redbird. And so he came out, and then he worked with the local BIA Western Regional Office, as well as the local BLM people, because we have the firefighting that happens on Washoe lands is through an MOU with the BLM. We also had the East Fork Fire District, which is the county representatives for this area. So each Bayer team will be made up specifically, but they did send out somebody from BIA, our regional office. So depending on where you are, where your fire is, it would probably be that kind of a mix. And this was the first time we had gotten funding for 2 other fires, the Cutter and Preacher fires, which happened about 3 years ago. And the Bayer report was put together without our input, which made it very, very difficult, because some of the priorities that were called out in this restoration effort were not included, particularly the cultural site surveys and covering those up. So there was things that were included in this one that were very, very specific based on bringing the tribe in. So if you're in a situation, there is a fire in your area, I strongly encourage you to get to know these fire folks and get them to invite you out, because it made a huge difference in the way they put together that report. And the report, the Bayer report's 175 pages long, very, very prescriptive. We have to put X number of linear feet of straw wattle along Pine Nut Creek, which is what Coralee was referring to, where those barrels and cars and stuff were. We have to put X number of a certain kind of fencing along each creek. Very, very prescriptive.
Surface water.
And they have
John, you got off mute.
we can tell John's off mute. So the Bayer report, the funding, I have to say, is I think a little bit less than normally these activities would cost. And so it's a strange kind of relationship where we have the Washoe Environmental Department, which has staff, has capacity, but it wasn't enough money for us to do the work. We had to go out and hire contractors, because we're gonna plant 6,000 trees like in 2 weeks. Well, a staff of 7 or 8 field crew, that's gonna take months. But so we ended up contracting with the state of Nevada, the prison crews, the ones that go out and do firefighting, and then when they're not firefighting, they do restoration. So we were able to work out a contract. It's been a very long and involved process. But that is how we are able to afford to do a bunch of these field activities. So our staff is doing a lot of the mapping, planning, surveying, and then the And then we're going to be working with these prison crews. Somebody's asking, this came through a 638 money? It did. The bear budgets do not include any kind of indirect. That had to come out of a separate pot. So it is a strict contract between BIA and Washoe Environmental. I was wondering if Rhiana or Helen could talk about the cultural survey that they did earlier.
Questions here that I see. I don't want to get too buried. I wanted to. Jolene asked a couple of questions. One was about the seed propagation. So with the seed propagation, first, the pine nut seeds are collected and cleaned by staff here in the office. They are not they're not sprouted before they're planted, but they are planted with seedlings of nurse plants that have already been propagated. And so we have a whole pile sitting out under the tree for the cutter preacher fires right now in the shade that are getting ready to go in the ground of the sagebrush seedlings. And those we purchased. We did not have the facilities to grow all of those at this time, but that's something the tribe would like to have eventually. And then you also had a question about how long it took to complete the Bayer planning, which Susan may be able to answer. And was there any done before the fire? And that portion that was done before the fire is the portion that was in the Resilience Garden Toolkit with the general planning for best management practices for this area. However, you can't actually do the Bayer first because it's a burned area emergency response. So that can't be done itself until after the fire. And then there was another question about who wrote the work plans. So the work plans are pretty much directly taken from the Bayer report, and then they're done by the department.
So yeah, the Bayer team was only here about a week. They consider themselves a rapid strike team. So they came in, did their surveying. They can't do it till the fire is either fully contained or 99.9% contained. And then they come in and these guys are very well trained. They all come up from a firefighting background. And so, which is a little bit different than a restoration background. So they come in from the firefighting background, they go around, they look at that soil intensity, the burn levels, all that kind of thing. They put together their plan literally, I would say, in 3 or 4 days. And it slowed down a little bit because they did allow us. I went out on the first site visit with Coralee and Leander and the Western Region office, Jerry M. and Montina, Three Fingers, if anybody knows those guys. And then we had our input. I think they spoke with our TIPO officer, Daryl Cruz, and I'm not sure, maybe Herman Fillmore, who's our cultural director, but they got a little bit of input. I know they spent one day with Daryl doing some cultural surveying, and then boom, that Bayer report was finalized like the next day. And that work plan, again, was very prescriptive. So we have to do exactly what they say in their formulas. We can't move money around. It wasn't like, here's a big chunk. Somebody asked how much we got for this. Emily, do you remember? We were looking at it earlier today. It was like 154, I think, for 5,000 something acres.
Yes. We are applying to BIA to ask for that to be extended because this is for some limited vegetation islands. And while we're still going to use the vegetation island approach, we've had a discussion and don't think that that is going to be enough in order to get enough vegetation islands that will be able to survive in a fire this large so that they do all grow back together.
So that was the biggest thing that came out of the pre-planning, the Resilience Garden Toolkit that Emily's speaking of. We had met, because of the preacher fires, with BIA, BLM. We had long discussions. John Warpay is on the line, and he was in on this. Long discussions about using purely native seed versus a seed blend that the BLM uses that has a lot of lower cost seeds to fill out the mix. When we did the calculations for just the seed, if we bought just native seed to do the cutter preacher fires, I think it was like $46,000 just for the seed. That wasn't for anything else. And we realized, eeks, we're going to have to be a little more flexible with our seed blend. This, for the numbers fire, or maybe it was cutter preacher, we decided to to get seeds from the Nevada Department of Forestry, who's also who did the
It'll be done for numbers.
Yeah, the Cutter Preacher Fire, I think it was just this week, ordered a bunch of seed, and it was what, $13,000 or something. I mean, it was a really huge difference. Oh yeah. But a huge difference in going with a private seed contractor who only used, hand harvested native seeds versus a slightly diluted blend. And that, that includes things like Western ryegrass and some of the bunch grasses and things like that. So it wasn't, it's not a horrible blend, and we're not putting in Timothy and some other, lawn grasses. Oh no, did you lose me?
We lost you for a second. So I was trying to tell you that. And when you get through that, just check in the chat box. There's a question from Gary Tom that you should be able to answer.
Oh, I don't see it. Hang on.
He wants to know the total acreage for the Cutter and the Preacher fires.
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to look at that. I know people are always interested in money, and I think we got, I think it was about 210,000 for the Cutter Preacher fires. I can look real quick and tell you the exact
Cutter fire
acreage.
was just over 70,000, and the Preacher fire was a little bit more, I believe.
Oh, yeah, it was like, I thought it was like 130, 140, but I think it's like 207,000. So again, it sounds like a lot until you look at what they want you to do, which is restore, I think Cutter Preacher is about 4,500 acres. Numbers Fire is 5,800. And so there's just no way to do all that. So in the Numbers Fire, there will be some aerial seeding that is going to be done in conjunction with the BLM. So we had to take money out of our budget to pay for the BLM piece of this, which was something that the Bear people wanted included. That makes sense. So we don't have any flexibility in that. There was no money put into the Cutter Preacher fires for aerial seeding. So there are some differences. Again, this is something that maybe would have been negotiated better had somebody from the Washoe tribe been more involved in developing the Bear report. So are there any other questions? I hope I got the money questions answered. We realized pretty quickly that it is critical for us to be able to propagate our own seedlings. We're paying $2 a piece for seedlings from the Nevada State Nursery, which sounds inexpensive, but when you start looking at tens of thousands of seedlings, you realize, hey, a better use of this money is to actually hire Washoe environmental staff, put together a greenhouse, and grow these ourselves. And then we have another resource, because what happened to us is that the BLM and Forest Service had bought up literally every seedling last year. So we couldn't do any restoration last summer because there was literally no plant material available. And that's when we started really focusing on trying to get money to do a native seed nursery, which Rhiana, who's on the line, is going to be very involved in and has already done a lot of plant propagation for other projects. And hey, Helen, I can see you there. Do you want to talk about what you and the TIPO did this week? I'll mute myself so we don't get feedback.
Yeah, definitely. So Hungamaheji, my name's Helen Fillmore. I am new with the Washoe Environmental Protection Department, but definitely not new in the area. I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen. Okay, never mind. I wanted to show, I was going to pull up a map that just shows the areas that the Washoe tribe will be replanting, because when we say that the funding is very limited, it really means that we're definitely not going to be revegetating these whole fires or revegetating these whole sites. And so Coralee had gone in and tried to find some kind of planting areas, and each are about an acre in area, and they're dispersed throughout the fire area on tribal allotment lands. And so there's roughly 30 sites for the Preacher and Cutter, and she did her presentation on the numbers fire, but I'm going to just talk about the preacher and cutter because we're working on it currently. Going back to what Susan said as far as trying to get involved in the bear planning immediately, like while the fire is happening, just because what had happened with the cultural monitoring on the preacher and cutter is that it's definitely had to be reduced, and we're not able to do any kind of, I guess, restoration of cultural sites or mitigation of the impacts, fire impacts to cultural sites within the preacher and cutter, except within these small little planting areas. And so within these areas, we went out with our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Daryl Cruz, yesterday to kind of locate them, but also to do kind of a first little scoping of the a handful of the sites to come up with a monitoring plan, because these are, it's fall time, it's hunting season, it's pine nut season, it's camping season, there's a lot of off-roaders. And so when it comes to cultural monitoring, we have to be really sensitive to not flag these areas or draw attention to these areas where there might be some findings, because you don't want to create any type of looting. So we kind of went to the site to see if we can locate it, see how easily accessible they are, and then to kind of come up with a plan for how we're going to address the cultural monitoring stuff. So it's all going to be happening kind of in partnership with the planting. So we're going to be out the day before and the mornings before. Our work crews go in there to do the cultural monitoring. We may have to shift some of the site boundaries a little bit, so we'll do that the day before. And then the morning before, we're going to be designating, I guess, creating these buffer zones to prevent any type of planting or disturbance, as well as trying to do some mitigation within these planting sites. So John just said that I can share my screen. I just want to share this to give.
I made you a co-host, Helen, so you can go ahead and share your screen with the group now.
Okay, so can you guys see the map? Okay,
yes,
so I just wanted to show this. So these are very small portions of these overall fires, because these are just the portions that are on these, I guess, primary tribal allotment lands. And then even within that, the only areas we're replanting are these very small 1 acre plots. And it really is, you know, it's a funding issue. We just don't have enough funding to get out to the rest of the areas. So we really are trying to select plots that are, Coralee went in kind of on GIS to select plots that are going to be most advantageous for growing, because we want to make sure that the nursery plants and then the trees coming up afterwards have the best chance of success. And so as you can see, I think there was a question about, did you plan fuel breaks within the replanting? And in short, yes, there's huge fuel breaks between these, except that there's still a lot of cheatgrass that's coming back in the area. But we're not going to be planting trees right next to each other. There's definitely going to be a lot of space in between each of the planted areas. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. But that was just to kind of give you guys a quick overview of what we're doing for the cultural monitoring piece. And for this, and unfortunately, we don't get to do, you know, a full assessment, or the tribe doesn't get to do a full assessment. But we are going to do it the best that we can within the areas that we might be disturbing during planting. So yeah, I'll pass the mic back to Emily.
Sorry, I was just answering something in the chat box. So again, this is a project, and Helen got into it, I was also going to talk about that is kind of where we're at right now. This presentation is on the numbers fire, and the reason that the presentation was done on the numbers fire as opposed to the cutter and preacher fires even though those restoration efforts are a little bit further along, is because it shows how once you have had an issue where things haven't gone smoothly, that the next time around you can bring in the lessons learned. And so the planning for the Numbers fire is a lot of the lessons learned that came from the Cutter and Preacher fire. So that's part of what Susan was talking about in terms of the funding and the tribe not really being involved with the Cutter Preacher fires on being able to plan for how those were done. And so there's things like there's a lot less money for cultural monitoring and things like that within those fire budgets because the tribe was not involved in those. So the Numbers fire is definitely an improvement upon that. And I think I also just wanted to touch on where we are with that right now. It took a really long time to get the funding through from the BIA, so the tribe has still been doing some work towards it, but today was the first day from the fires 3 years ago that the money actually came through. So therefore the reimbursement part has been difficult and some of the restoration hasn't been able to occur. And I think that some of that has to do with the fact that the tribe hadn't been as involved in it. And so there was a lot more back and forth on things that weren't working. We have had staff go out and collect the pine nuts so that they're ready. We have the seedlings out there that we have gotten from the state that are going to get planted, and they'll be planted with mulch. So there'll be a nurse plant that's planted, and then there'll be at least 5 or 6 seeds planted with each of those with a bit of mulch because the soil's been pretty stripped. So there's not a lot of leaf litter or other things for them to grow in. And they will not be buried in the soil because they grow better on top of the soil, but there will be digging because you have to dig to plant the nurse plants for them, the seedlings that are already growing. And so this is, kind of where we are on that right now. There's been issues with COVID like everyone else has had in terms of getting the crew out to help with the planting because they keep having people get infected with COVID and then it keeps getting put off for another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks every time someone else gets infected. So we're still waiting to find out about that. So that's kind of in process, and hopefully before the snow comes this year, all of the planting can be done on that, and then it can be monitored over the next year, see if anything needs to be replanted and how things are working. And then I just wanted to put a few notes in here from things that came from the Resilience Garden Toolkit, which is a really comprehensive plan that is part of the climate resilience planning. And one of the things is that I have not come from this area, and so I found this really interesting. I thought other people might find it interesting as well, is that when you're in an area that has a lot more water, generally the high water years mean less fire danger. But it was talking about the fact that, when you have too much precipitation in this desert area, and you can have those extreme events with climate change where you either don't get any precipitation or you get too much. It was talking about the overgrowth of vegetation that happens then, and then when the dry happens after that, how much it's going to increase the fire danger. And so I think a lot of times we think of the precipitation just as good, but in this area it really needs to be balanced more because it is a desert environment. It's not used to having that much precipitation. And it also says that when the precipitation comes in a heavier amount, and especially when it's timed later, then it can cause extreme overgrowth of the invasive species like the cheatgrass, and that the cheatgrass is what fuels the size and severity of most Great Basin fires. And so I thought that was really important to understand that the cheatgrass not only survives the fires better than the native vegetation, but it actually can determine the size and severity of those fires. So it's really important to do the invasive species management. And I also just wanted to mention that one of the other things that is included in this planning process all through the plans are the importance of having the multi-generational engagement for forest resilience. So having elders working with children and having community engagement. And so that is a theme that is throughout the entire plan. And I just want to have a look. And yes, Susan, the COVID delays were not from the Washoe staff. It is from the Nevada prison crew side who have been sick. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we don't have any other questions in here that I've missed.
What Emily just said is that, as probably everybody on this call understands, there is very little money for implementation, right? And so figuring out that we could further some of our climate adaptation goals by partnering or piggybacking on money for these post-fire restorations became the clearest way forward for us. So we had this, BIA money to do a vulnerability study and then the adaptation planning. And then as many of you experience, you put all this money and effort into the planning, but you have no way to implement it. So the plan sits on the shelf. So we didn't want that to happen. So we focused very clearly as we were doing our adaptation planning on something that our department, the Environmental Protection Department, could do ourselves. There was a bunch of adaptation plans that included housing and the clinic and all these other departments that we don't have any influence over. So we wanted the consultants to give us something very detailed. It's like a how-to guide to planting pinyons in these resilience garden plots. And then when the fires happened, we said, hey, this is an opportunity for us to create more capacity within our department and to leverage this money into doing the planting that the tribe wants, because we have a lot of encroachment into our pinyon lands, and with climate change, the conditions in those lands are changing. And so it was just a creative way for us to get some funding from a whole different unexpected pot to move our goals forward. So just something for you all to think about. And the same thing with the native plant nursery, is that's something we very much want for all of our restoration projects. So if we can just essentially hire ourselves to do all that propagation, then it furthers our goals on other projects. So just something to think about.
Susan, this is Cliff. I want to say something before it ended, because you're talking about shortfalls. Nevada-wise, I'm a member of a Nevada legislative group that is looking at wildfires and funding shortfalls. It'd be great if you can share what the funding shortfalls were or are to me, and I can give that to the legislative committee, because then we can see some funding maybe on the state side to address some of these funding shortfalls.
That would be great. And
I
also
can say,
just another piece in terms of the cheatgrass, real quick. We went out and did these field trips with the BLM and the pine nut propagation experts and all this stuff, and there was the layer of cheatgrass out there is so dense that to even get to the ground, we're going to have to rake these islands that we're creating are going to have to be raked. So we actually pull some of that litter just to get down to the ground. So any kind of aerial seeding, this is on the Cutter Preacher fire, any kind of aerial seeding just won't work. It'll fail because it'll just land on cheatgrass. It won't even hit the dirt. So the Numbers fire, because of that, the Numbers fire did include some aerial, pre-emergent herbicide treatments this year, and then we have to wait a whole year before we can seed into the Numbers fire. So that restoration effort will happen next field season, which happens for us. Field season starts in October. So this is our crunch time. October 15th to about December 15th is our window, and then our moisture cycle starts in December. So if we miss this window, we have to wait a whole nother year.
Yeah. And Susan, I was just going to say in response to Cliff that I think there's some really common things, and that we had this time as well, is the lack of equipment being included in there to do it. Like there is work that's included in there that requires a backhoe, like an extensive amount of work. There's work that really requires a side-by-side and really requires some sort of a trailer to be able to water some of the plants, but none of that equipment is actually included. And there's not even rental for that equipment included in the funding that we were giving. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to negotiate with BIA now, is to get the funding for the equipment that's needed. And when I had said earlier that they were funding the islands that were being funded, the amount per acre made sense when you're looking at a smaller fire, because it's easier for those islands to grow back together because they have a lot more surrounding forest. However, when we're looking at a fire the size of the Numbers fire, there's not other surrounding forest to start growing back into there. And so it was increasing the amount of planting, the seeds, the seedlings, and the money for doing that, as well as the cultural monitoring for the additional sites that might be found around planting areas. And so that's something that was really deficient in the current funding.
Great, everyone. That was a great presentation, Emily, and everyone at Washoe. I'll tell you what, that was 80 people participated in this presentation this afternoon, and we got a lot of comments, a lot of positive feedback. This recording will be uploaded to our website, and the presentation, the PowerPoint, will also be uploaded to our website. And if you need any more information, it sounds like you can contact the good folks over at Washoe. So we have a few more minutes, so if there's nothing else on here, I think I will go ahead and close out this presentation. Thank you for everyone for attending today. And Emily, any last words?
No, thank you, everyone. And sorry about this. This is kind of, I'm new to the project. So in some of these things, I'm not always the best person to answer the questions.
Well, yeah, I'm getting lots of well wishes and thank yous and great sessions. So thank you, everyone, for attending the session. Thank you for attending the 28th annual conference. We have another session starting here in a few minutes. And then, of course, we'll have more sessions continuing tomorrow. So take care, everyone, and be safe.
Thank you.